Everyone thought the future of trucking had already been decided. Electric trucks were everywhere in the headlines. Billion-dollar battery factories were being built. Governments were setting deadlines for diesel bans. And companies like Tesla were promising a future where engines themselves would become obsolete. So when Cummins announced a brand new combustion engine, most people barely reacted. At first, it sounded outdated, almost irrelevant. Another engine from another old industrial company trying to survive in an electric world. But then something strange started happening behind the scenes. Fleet operators began placing orders. Logistics companies started running private tests. Engineers who usually dismissed combustion technology started paying attention, because this wasn't a normal engine, and the uncomfortable part for the EV industry was that it solved problems electric trucks still couldn't fully fix. What made the situation even stranger was how quietly Cummins handled the entire launch. No flashy reveal, no futuristic marketing campaign, no promises about changing humanity. Just a machine called the X15N, a heavy-duty engine built for long-haul trucks. But buried inside that engine was an idea that could reshape the next decade of transportation, and almost nobody saw it coming. To understand why this matters, you have to understand the company behind it, because Cummins wasn't supposed to be the company disrupting the future. It was supposed to be one of the companies being replaced by it. Cummins started more than 100 years ago in Columbus, Indiana. Long before electric vehicles, before climate targets, before software-defined cars, back then, engines were brutal machines. Loud, dirty, unreliable, and diesel technology was still treated like an experiment. The founder, Cummins, believed diesel could eventually power almost everything. The problem was that nobody else believed him. Gasoline engines already dominated the market, and diesel was considered slow, heavy, and impractical. Early on, the company struggled badly. Money disappeared quickly. Some people thought the business wouldn't survive at all. But then Cummins did something unusual. Instead of trying to convince people with advertisements, they decided to prove reliability publicly. One of their diesel-powered vehicles completed the drive from New York to Los Angeles at a time when most people doubted diesel. Engines could even handle daily use. That stunt changed everything. Suddenly, diesel stopped looking experimental. It started looking inevitable. Over the next few decades, Cummins became deeply connected to the trucking industry. Their engines powered military equipment during World War II, then buses, freight trucks, construction machines, mining equipment. Entire logistics systems began depending on them, and eventually Cummins spread everywhere. America, Europe, India, China, Latin America. By the time global supply chains exploded in the late 20th century, Cummins had already become one of the most trusted engine manufacturers in the world. But then the world changed again. The same diesel technology that made the company successful started becoming a liability. Governments pushed for emission reductions. Environmental regulations became stricter every year. Cities started discussing diesel bans. Investors shifted money toward clean energy companies, and suddenly the future belonged to battery companies, not engine manufacturers. That pressure created a problem Cummins couldn't ignore forever. If transportation eventually abandoned combustion completely, what exactly would happen to a company built around engines? That question quietly shaped what happened next, because while the world was focused on electric vehicles, Cummins was working on something very different behind closed doors. Not a traditional diesel engine, not a fully electric truck either. Something in between, something flexible enough to survive during the messy transition nobody really talks about publicly. Project eventually became the X15N, and this is where the story starts to get uncomfortable. For a lot of people in the EV industry, on paper, the X15N sounds simple. It's a natural gas engine designed for heavy-duty commercial trucks. It runs on fuels like CNG and renewable natural gas instead of diesel. But the reason companies started paying attention wasn't just because it used cleaner fuel. It was because of what it allowed them to avoid. C. The biggest problem in long-haul trucking isn't hype, it's downtime. Every hour a truck sits idle costs money. Charging delays cost money. Limited range costs money. Replacing an entire fleet costs enormous amounts of money. And that's where the X15N became dangerous. Because instead of asking companies to completely rebuild their operations around batteries, Cummins offered something easier. Existing trucks could often be upgraded instead of replaced entirely. Drivers didn't need to completely relearn operations. Maintenance systems stayed familiar. Routes stayed predictable, and fuel costs dropped compared to diesel. For fleet owners, that sounded a lot less risky than betting everything on infrastructure that still wasn't fully ready, and the numbers made the decision harder to ignore. Engine could produce around 400 to 500 horsepower, enough for long-haul freight operations, enough for steep climbs, enough for heavy cargo. Cummins also designed it to deliver strong torque at low RPM, which matters enormously in commercial trucking because smoother power delivery reduces strain during constant hauling, but performance wasn't the real selling point. The real selling point was economics. Natural gas was cheaper than diesel in many markets. Maintenance intervals could be longer. The engine produced less soot and fewer heavy emissions. Some companies estimated operational savings large enough to completely change long-term fleet calculations. And that's when people inside the transportation industry started asking a question that sounded almost impossible a few years ago. What if electric trucks aren't actually the immediate future for heavy logistics? Because the truth is, electric trucks still face problems most headlines rarely focus on. Batteries are heavy. Charging infrastructure remains inconsistent. Charging takes time. And long-distance freight companies don't operate on ideal conditions. They operate on schedules. Delays destroy profits. Cummins understood something important here. The trucking industry didn't necessarily need the perfect future immediately. It needed a practical transition technology that worked right now, and suddenly, the X15N stopped looking like an alternative. It started looking like a bridge between two worlds. That realization changed the way competitors viewed Cummins almost overnight. Tesla was focused on fully electric trucking. Toyota was investing heavily into hydrogen systems. BYD was expanding electric commercial fleets globally. Everyone was chasing the same vision of transportation. But Cummins attacked the problem from another angle entirely. Instead of forcing the industry to leap into the future all at once, they built something designed for the uncomfortable middle period nobody wants to talk about publicly. The transition phase, where companies still need reliability, low costs, existing infrastructure, and operational flexibility at the same time. And that strategy quietly started attracting serious attention because for all the excitement surrounding EV technology, many logistics operators were privately worried about moving too fast. Not because they disliked clean energy, but because transportation systems are brutally unforgiving. When technology fails unexpectedly, a passenger car breaking down is inconvenient. A freight network collapsing is catastrophic. That's why Cummins made another critical decision most people overlooked. They designed the X15N around fuel flexibility. Today, it runs mainly on natural gas and renewable fuels. But the company also prepared the platform for hydrogen compatibility in the future. That single decision changed the conversation entirely, because now Cummins wasn't betting against the future. They were positioning themselves to survive multiple versions of it at once, and maybe that's the most important part of this entire story. For years, the public conversation around transportation has sounded very simple. Batteries will replace engines. Diesel will disappear. One technology wins, everything else dies. But reality almost never moves that cleanly. Infrastructure develops unevenly. Governments change priorities. Fuel prices shift constantly. Different industries need different solutions, and the farther you move into heavy transportation, the harder it becomes to force a single, universal answer onto everyone. The X15N exposed that reality in a way the industry couldn't completely ignore anymore. The future of transportation isn't one technology replacing another overnight. Maybe it's a long period where multiple systems compete, overlap, and evolve together. Electric trucks in some regions, hydrogen in others, renewable gas somewhere else, hybrid systems in between. And if that happens, companies like Cummins become much harder to eliminate than people expected. Because suddenly the old engine company doesn't look outdated anymore, it looks adaptable, and in industries worth trillions of dollars. Adaptability usually matters a lot more than hype.